In a world consumed by screens, social media, and fleeting pleasures, it seems almost impossible to imagine a teenager rising above the noise to become a model of holiness. And yet, Carlo Acutis, a 15-year-old boy from Milan who died of leukemia in 2006, has shaken the church and the entire modern world with a life so pure, so radical, and so different that many now call him the first millennial saint. Carlo was not a monk, not a priest, not a cloistered visionary. He was a normal teenager who loved video games, programming, playing with his pets, and hanging out with friends. But here lies the shocking paradox. While thousands of young people drowned in addictions, distractions, and an endless chase for likes and followers, Carlo chose to make Christ his one obsession. His sanctuary was not the glowing screen of a smartphone, but the radiant presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Perhaps the most astonishing fact is that Carlo used the very tool that enslaves millions, the internet, to proclaim the greatest truth of the Church. With his self-taught programming skills, he created a digital catalog of Eucharistic miracles from around the world, transforming technology into a pulpit of grace. He once declared, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." That single statement contains the essence of his sanctity and his shocking difference from the world around him. The story of Carlo Acutis is not just a biography of a devout teenager. It is a challenge, a mirror, and an inspiration for every one of us. His signs of holiness are not unreachable ideals, but living pathways available to all. The first of these signs, the burning love for the Eucharist, unlocks everything else. The first sign, love for the Eucharist. Holiness is often imagined as something distant, reserved for priests, nuns, or mystics hidden away in monasteries. Yet Carlo Acutis shattered this illusion. At the very heart of his extraordinary life lies a single blazing truth: his radical love for the Eucharist. This love was not symbolic, not a vague devotion, but the very center of his existence. To understand Carlo is to understand how the Eucharist became his oxygen, his strength, and his destiny. 1. Childhood wonder that defied logic. From a very young age, Carlo displayed an unusual attraction to the things of God. At the age of 7, an age when most children are immersed in cartoons or video games, Carlo was already begging his parents to take him to daily Mass. He once told his mother, "To always be close to Jesus, that is my life plan." No one had forced this upon him. It was not a parental demand, but a personal awakening. This childlike wonder became the seed of sanctity. Most Catholics, even adults, approach the Eucharist as a routine or even as a burden. Carlo, however, saw it as the most exciting event of his day. For him, the Eucharist was alive. It was Jesus himself, present and waiting. He could not understand how people could pass by a church without entering. His astonishment was almost scandalous. How can people stand in line for hours to see a concert, yet only give a few seconds to God? 2. The daily Mass, his secret weapon. As Carlo grew older, his devotion only intensified. Daily Mass became his unshakable habit. While other teenagers stayed in bed or scrolled through their phones, Carlo walked to church. He declared boldly, "If we get suntan when we stay under the sun, then when we stay before the Eucharist, we become saints." This was not a poetic exaggeration. Carlo literally believed that time before the Blessed Sacrament transformed him from the inside out. His friends would sometimes laugh at his seriousness, yet they could not deny his joy. Carlo's secret was simple. He treated every Mass as a meeting with his greatest friend, and this friend, Jesus, gave him a strength that the world could neither understand nor destroy. 3. Technology at the service of the Eucharist. Here lies the shocking twist in Carlo's story. He did not reject technology, he baptized it. While so many teenagers drowned in endless scrolling, pornography, or toxic content, Carlo turned the internet into a stage for evangelization. Self-taught in coding, he built a massive online archive cataloging over 100 Eucharistic miracles. He worked tirelessly, spending months researching, designing, and uploading. The result was more than a website, it became a mission. His catalog has since traveled the world, septfray, translated into multiple languages and displayed in churches across continents. For Carlo, technology was never an idol, it was an instrument to magnify God. The very medium that enslaves millions became, in his hands, a vehicle of truth. This is perhaps his greatest legacy to a digital generation. You can master technology, or it will master you. Carlo proved that sanctity in the age of the internet is possible. Number 4. Suffering united with the Eucharist. The real test of devotion comes not in joy but in suffering. At the age of 15, Carlo was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. Within weeks, his body weakened rapidly, yet instead of despair, he offered every ounce of his pain to Christ. His words pierce like fire. "I offer all my suffering for the Pope and for the Church, that I may not spend time in purgatory but go straight to heaven." This is no romantic ideal. The agony was real. Bone pain, weakness, the slow collapse of his young body. And yet his eyes remained fixed on the Eucharist. Even in the hospital, he asked to receive Holy Communion daily. He said, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." For Carlo, suffering was no longer meaningless. It became an altar where he united himself with the sacrifice of Jesus. 5. The Eucharist as the foundation of sanctity. Carlo's life demonstrates that holiness is not built on extraordinary visions or supernatural phenomena. It begins with fidelity to the Eucharist. This was his cornerstone, the axis around which everything else revolved. His charity to the poor, his purity, his humility, his joy. Without the Eucharist, Carlo would have been just a kind and intelligent boy. With the Eucharist, he became a saint in the making. It is deeply unsettling to compare Carlo's burning love with our lukewarm faith. Millions of Catholics attend Sunday Mass half-heartedly, distracted, bored, or absent. Carlo, a teenager, made the Eucharist the very heartbeat of his existence. He challenges us directly. Do we truly believe that Jesus is present in the Eucharist? If we did, our lives could not remain the same. 6. A wake-up call for the digital generation. Carlo's first sign of holiness is not a gentle suggestion, it is a wake-up call. In a society obsessed with temporary thrills, Carlo reminds us that eternity is real. He teaches us that the Eucharist is not a ritual, but an encounter with God Himself. His life screams at us, do not waste your time, seek what truly matters. For the digital generation, this is perhaps the most shocking revelation. Sanctity is not reserved for the past. It is possible now in the age of smartphones and algorithms. The path is simple, but radical. Place the Eucharist at the center of your life, and everything else will follow. The second sign, simplicity and detachment from the world. If the Eucharist was the blazing sun at the center of Carlo Acutis' spiritual life, then simplicity and detachment from worldly pleasures were the atmosphere that allowed that sun to shine without obstruction. In an age where materialism dominates, where value is measured by possessions, status, or digital popularity, Carlo's way of life was almost scandalous. His simplicity was not forced poverty. It was a radical choice, a conscious detachment that declared, "I belong to God, not to things." 1. Growing up in a wealthy environment, Carlo was born into a relatively affluent family in Milan. His parents could provide him with comforts, privileges, and the possibility of living like any other upper-class teenager. He had access to the latest technology, good education, and opportunities that many only dream of. Yet, here lies the first paradox. Though he could have lived like a prince, Carlo consistently chose the path of simplicity. He did not despise material goods, he simply refused to be enslaved by them. When other kids were obsessed with designer clothes, branded shoes, or expensive gadgets, Carlo wore the same sweater and jeans, indifferent to fashion trends. His detachment shocked even his own parents, who admitted that their son's spirituality was far deeper than theirs. 2. Choosing simplicity in a world of excess. Carlo's simplicity was not accidental, it was deliberate. He once said, "Being always united to Jesus, that is my life program." To be united to Christ meant refusing anything that could become an idol. He never wanted to be admired for what he owned, but for how he loved. His schoolmates often marveled that while many teenagers flaunted their phones, bikes, or sneakers, Carlo showed no interest in impressing others. He had a computer, yes, but he used it not as a toy, but as a tool for God's mission. He did not reject technology, but he rejected vanity. This is simplicity at its purest form, not the absence of things, but freedom from their power. 3. Detachment from money. Perhaps the most striking testimony of Carlo's simplicity came in his handling of money. He received allowances, but instead of spending them on entertainment or luxuries, he quietly gave to the poor. He often purchased sleeping bags for the homeless, bought food for those in need, and donated to charities. He once remarked, "There are people who live as if they were immortal and then they die without realizing the value of life." This was not a vague moral statement. It was his way of refusing to be consumed by greed. For Carlo, money was never a master. It was a servant, a means to help others. 4. Simplicity in friendships and relationships. Carlo's detachment extended beyond material possessions. It shaped his relationships. Unlike many teenagers who crave popularity or validation, Carlo was free from the fear of being unpopular. He was friendly with everyone, especially with those who were marginalized or bullied at school. He did not seek the approval of the powerful, but the dignity of the forgotten. His simplicity of heart allowed him to see people as they were, not as society labeled them. To the poor, he was a brother. To the lonely, he was a friend. To the arrogant, he was a gentle challenge. This purity of intention made his relationships genuine, unmarred by manipulation or self-interest. 5. Simplicity and purity of life. One of the most countercultural aspects of Carlo's simplicity was his purity. While many of his peers were consumed by unhealthy relationships, pornography, or peer pressure, Carlo chose chastity and self-control. This decision shocked even his contemporaries who thought such ideals were outdated. But Carlo understood something profound. Holiness requires discipline. He often said, "The happiness you are seeking, the happiness you have a right to enjoy, has a name and a face. It is Jesus of Nazareth." This purity of life was not repression, it was freedom. By detaching himself from lust and vice, Carlo could love with a heart that was whole, clean, and strong. 6. The shocking contrast with modern youth. It is impossible to ignore the contrast between Carlo and the culture around him. Today's youth often live trapped in cycles of consumption, endlessly scrolling for entertainment, dressing to impress, and working to maintain appearances. Carlo's life, on the other hand, was almost a protest, a living contradiction. Imagine a teenager who had the skills to be famous online, who could have built a name for himself through technology, yet who refused fame for the sake of humility. Carlo knew that the world's applause was fleeting. He declared with his life, "Not me, but God." This radical detachment was shocking because it stripped away the illusions of modern culture. Carlo proved that one can be young, intelligent, and modern, yet not enslaved by trends, money, or ego. 7. Simplicity as a preparation for death. Carlo's simplicity was not only a way of living, but also a preparation for dying. When his illness came suddenly, he did not cling to life with fear. He had already lived freely, unattached, ready to meet God. His famous words at the hospital echo like a thunderclap. "I am happy to die because I live my life without wasting a single minute on things that do not please God." How many of us could say the same? Most people fear death precisely because they are too attached to the world. Carlo's detachment gave him peace. He was ready, even joyful, because his treasure had never been here. It was always in heaven. 8. The lesson for us. Carlo's second sign of holiness, simplicity and detachment, is perhaps the hardest for modern people to imitate. We live in a culture that idolizes consumption, possessions, and appearances. Yet Carlo calls us to freedom. He challenges us to ask, do we own our things, or do our things own us? Do we live for applause or for truth? Do we love people for who they are, or for what they can give us? Simplicity is not about abandoning everything, it is about living with everything in its right place. For Carlo, God was first. Everything else, money, technology, friendships, were secondary tools to serve love. This is the freedom that made him holy. 9. A prophetic voice for today. Carlo Acutis speaks prophetically to the modern world. You cannot serve both God and money. His life shouts this truth louder than sermons. In him we see that holiness is possible, not by escaping the world, but by living in it without chains. His simplicity was not weakness, it was strength. It was the courage to live differently, to resist the lies of consumerism, and to proclaim with his very life, God alone is enough. The second sign of Carlo's holiness is both beautiful and terrifying. Beautiful because it radiates a purity and freedom that attract hearts. Terrifying because it forces us to confront our own attachments. Carlo's detachment was not a denial of life, but the very key to living it fully. By letting go of what does not matter, he held firmly to the only thing that does, God. This is why Carlo is not just a story of the past, but a wake-up call to the present. His simplicity is an invitation to live free, to live pure, to live detached. so that when death comes, we too can say like him, I did not waste my life. The third sign, charity and love for the poor. If Carlo's love for the Eucharist was the flame that fueled his soul, and his simplicity the air that kept it burning, then his charity was the light that radiated outward. Carlo's holiness was never self-contained. It overflowed into tangible acts of love for the poor, the marginalized, and the forgotten. In a society obsessed with self-promotion and comfort, Carlo's instinct to give, to serve, and to care is both inspiring and unsettling. His charity was not sentimental, it was radical, practical, and rooted in the very heart of the gospel. 1. A heart formed by love. Carlo's mother once admitted that before her son's influence, she was not particularly devout, but she was stunned by the depth of compassion in this boy who seemed to see Christ in every suffering person. From a young age, Carlo was deeply moved by stories of saints like Saint Francis of Assisi and Saint Dominic Savio, who lived lives of sacrifice and service. He absorbed these stories not as legends but as models to imitate. Carlo lived the conviction that every person carried the image of God. This belief shaped the way he treated everyone, from the wealthy to the homeless beggar on the street. For Carlo, charity was not an extra activity of faith, it was its very expression. 2. Quiet acts of giving. Unlike many who publicize their good works, Carlo's charity was quiet and discreet. He often spent his pocket money to buy sleeping bags or food for the homeless around Milan. He would approach them not with pity, but with friendship, often kneeling to speak to them eye to eye. His acts were simple but profound. Sitting with the lonely, carrying groceries for the elderly, tutoring classmates who struggled academically. Friends later testified that Carlo's generosity was contagious. His example stirred others to look beyond themselves. This quiet, hidden charity was not about recognition. It was about seeing Christ in disguise. 3. Digital charity, evangelizing the world. Carlo's charity extended beyond the streets of Milan. With his computer skills, he found a new frontier for generosity, the digital world. He used the internet not to promote himself, but to share God. His Eucharistic Miracles project was not only a work of devotion, it was a gift to millions of souls who might never have encountered these stories otherwise. Think about this: while millions of teenagers use the web for self-indulgence, Carlo used it to feed spiritual hunger across the globe. His website became a digital act of charity, a bridge between heaven and earth. In many ways, Carlo invented what we might now call digital evangelization, proving that charity in the 21st century must also include sharing truth online. 4. Love tested in suffering. Carlo's greatest charity, however, was revealed during his final illness. When leukemia struck, his body weakened rapidly, yet he refused to withdraw into self-pity. Instead, he offered his pain for others, saying, "I offer all my sufferings for the Pope, for the Church, and to go straight to heaven." Even in the hospital, he worried less about himself and more about the suffering of those around him. Nurses recalled how he smiled at them, encouraged them, and never complained. He once remarked, "There are people who are suffering much more than me." This is charity at its deepest, not only giving possessions, but giving oneself, even in the face of death. 5. The shocking contrast with selfishness. Carlo's charity is shocking when compared with the self-centeredness of modern culture. Today's youth are often taught to live for yourself, to pursue success, pleasure, and personal comfort above all. Carlo rejected this narrative completely. He lived for others. His life challenges us with uncomfortable questions. How often do we walk past the homeless without even seeing them? How often do we use our talents only for personal gain? Carlo forces us to confront our selfishness. He teaches that true joy is found not in receiving, but in giving. 6. Charity as a reflection of the Eucharist. Carlo's love for the poor was inseparable from his devotion to the Eucharist. For him, receiving Christ in communion demanded that he also serve Christ in others. He often said, "The Eucharist is my highway to heaven." But he also knew that the highway ran through the streets of Milan, where Christ lay hidden in the poor and abandoned. This is the great mystery of charity. It is not optional. The Eucharist transforms us into what we receive, and Christ himself is love. Carlo understood this instinctively. He could not kneel before Jesus in the tabernacle and ignore him in the hungry or homeless. 7. A prophetic message for the digital age. Carlo's charity also speaks prophetically to our times. In a world where compassion often stops at clicking like or sharing a post, Carlo reminds us that true charity requires sacrifice. It means giving time, resources, and even comfort. His digital project was born not from a desire for fame, but from a burning desire to help souls. This distinction is critical. In an age of performative charity where people showcase good deeds for applause, Carlo models hidden charity. He gave quietly, without posting or advertising. His charity was not about image, it was about love. 8. Charity and sainthood. Why is charity such a powerful sign of holiness? Because love is the essence of God Himself. John writes, God is love. Holiness is nothing more and nothing less than becoming like God. For Carlo, to love the poor, to forgive others, to give freely, was not an optional extra, it was the definition of being Christian. The Church does not canonize saints because they were merely prayerful. Saints are recognized because their love was extraordinary, visible, and transformative. Carlo's charity proves that even a teenager can live this radical call. His life screams the gospel truth: faith without works is dead. 9. The invitation for us. Carlo's third sign of holiness leaves us with a challenge. Will we live for ourselves or for others? Charity is not about waiting for the perfect opportunity. It begins now in small acts. Helping a neighbor, listening to a friend, sharing what we have, using our talents for good. Carlo shows us that charity is possible in every life stage, in every environment, even online. He invites us to stop wasting our lives on selfish pursuits and to pour them out for love. This is not only the path to sainthood, it is the path to happiness. Carlo's love for the poor was not an occasional activity, but a way of life. It was the outward sign of his inner union with Christ. His charity was quiet, sacrificial, and rooted in the Eucharist. He saw Jesus in the poor, in the sick, in the suffering, and he responded with action. This third sign of holiness challenges us deeply. It strips away excuses and confronts us with a choice. Either we love or we do not. Carlo chose love every time, and in doing so he left us a roadmap, not just to sainthood, but to true human greatness. The fourth sign: faith, trust, and acceptance of suffering. Holiness is not proven in moments of comfort, but in the crucible of pain. Many can speak about faith when life is smooth, but few can live it when life unravels. This is where Carlo Acutis' sanctity shines with an almost blinding clarity. His short life reached its climax not in success or applause, but in suffering, an illness that could have broken him, yet instead revealed the depth of his faith and trust in God. 1. The unexpected diagnosis. Carlo was only 15 when he was diagnosed with an aggressive form of leukemia. For a teenager filled with dreams, energy, and intelligence, this was a devastating blow. Most young people in his place would fall into despair, anger, or denial. Carlo did not. When he was told of his condition, his reaction stunned everyone. He accepted it calmly, with a serene faith that seemed beyond his years. He simply said, "The Lord has given me this disease at the right time, and I accept it." Those words alone are enough to shake us. How could a boy barely entering manhood face death with such composure? His faith was not theory, it was reality. 2. Offering suffering as a gift. Carlo never wasted his pain. From the very beginning of his illness, he decided to unite it with Christ's suffering. He said, "I offer all my sufferings for the Pope and for the Church so that I can go straight to heaven." This was not a superficial statement. His suffering was immense: weakness, fatigue, pain in his bones, and the rapid decline of his body. Yet Carlo transformed this agony into an altar of sacrifice. He refused to complain. Instead, he smiled, prayed, and kept his gaze fixed on Jesus. Here lies a shocking truth. Carlo understood suffering not as punishment, but as participation in Christ's cross. This perspective gave his pain meaning and power. 3. The witness of joy and pain. Those who visited Carlo in the hospital expected to find a broken boy. Instead, they found a radiant soul. Nurses and doctors testified that he never lost his smile, never spoke bitterly, and never complained about his lot. On the contrary, he often comforted others. He encouraged his mother to be strong, reassured his friends, and even joked with the staff. His joy was not denial, it was faith. He believed that death was not the end, but the beginning. His trust in God's promise of heaven allowed him to face pain with serenity. This is why his presence in the hospital became a quiet evangelization. People around him felt they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. 4. faith that transcends fear. Fear of death is perhaps the deepest fear of humanity, but Carlo seemed to transcend it. He once said, "I am happy to die because I live my life without wasting a single minute on things that do not please God." These words are both inspiring and terrifying. They force us to examine our own lives. How much time have we wasted? How much of our energy has been poured into trivialities, addictions, and vanity? Carlo's faith stripped away fear because his life had been lived in truth. He had nothing to regret, nothing to hide. His trust in God was total. 5. Acceptance as liberation. Acceptance of suffering does not mean passivity. For Carlo, it was active surrender. He knew he could not change his illness, but he could choose how to live it. And he chose love, he chose trust, he chose peace. This acceptance freed him. While many are enslaved by the question, "Why me?" Carlo asked instead, "How can I offer this?" That shift of perspective made all the difference. His acceptance liberated him from despair and transformed his suffering into grace. 6. The contrast with modern culture. Modern culture runs from suffering at all costs. We numb it with distractions, avoid it with comfort, and even deny it by chasing artificial happiness. Carlo's acceptance of suffering confronts us like a mirror. It shows us how little faith we truly live. Here was a teenager who had every reason to rebel, yet instead embraced his illness with peace. He challenges our fragile spirituality, our inability to endure even small discomforts without complaining. His life reveals the poverty of a culture addicted to ease. 7. A theology of suffering lived out. The Church teaches that suffering, when united with Christ, becomes redemptive. For many, this is an abstract doctrine. For Carlo, it was flesh and blood reality. He lived what St. Paul wrote, "I rejoice in my sufferings for your sake, and in my flesh I complete what is lacking in Christ's afflictions, for the sake of his body, the Church." Carlo embraced this theology with his whole being. His short life became a testimony that suffering has value, that it can save, that it can sanctify. This is why his death was not tragedy, but triumph. 8. Death as fulfillment. Carlo's final days were marked by extraordinary peace. He received the sacraments with devotion, prayed the rosary, and prepared himself for the encounter with God. When asked if he was afraid, he replied, "He would at all. My goal is heaven." He died on October 12, 2006 at the age of 15. But his death was not the end. It was the completion of his offering. His faith in the Eucharist, his simplicity, his charity, all of it culminated in this final sacrifice of trust. And because he accepted suffering, his life continues to shine like a beacon for millions. 9. The lesson for us. Carlo's fourth sign of holiness forces us to confront our own attitude toward suffering. Do we flee from it, curse it, and drown it in distractions? Or do we, like him, accept it and unite it to Christ? Carlo teaches us that suffering, while painful, is not meaningless. It can become the holiest offering of all. His example does not remove our pain, but it transforms it. It shows that faith is not about avoiding the cross, but carrying it with Christ. Trusting God does not guarantee comfort, but it guarantees victory. Carlo Acutis' acceptance of suffering is perhaps the most shocking and inspiring sign of his holiness. It reveals that sanctity is not measured by how long we live, but by how we love and trust even in the face of death. His faith transformed a hospital bed into a pulpit, his pain into a sacrifice, and his death into a testimony. The fourth sign is clear. True faith is proven not in words, but in how we face the cross. Carlo embraced his with joy, trust, and total surrender. And through this, he shows us that suffering, when lived with faith, becomes not a curse, but a crown. The fifth sign, holiness in the ordinary and a legacy for the digital generation. When people think of saints, they often imagine cloistered monks, missionaries in distant lands, or martyrs shedding blood for their faith. Yet Carlo Acutis breaks that mold completely. He was a teenager who played video games, loved soccer, enjoyed jokes, and used technology every day. Nothing about his external life seemed extraordinary. And yet, it was precisely in this ordinariness that his holiness burned brightest. The final sign of Carlo's sanctity is this. He shows us that holiness is possible here and now, in the middle of ordinary life, even in the digital age. 1. The sanctification of the ordinary. Carlo's daily routine looks similar to that of millions of teenagers. He woke up, went to school, did homework, played sports, and browsed the internet. But what made the difference was how he lived these moments. Every action was infused with intention. He offered his small sacrifices, giving up dessert, sharing his pocket money, spending time with lonely classmates, to God. He treated the ordinary not as trivial, but as opportunities for love. This is shocking in its simplicity. Many think sanctity requires dramatic gestures. Carlo proved that small acts done with great love are the real path to heaven. 2. Technology as a tool for holiness. Carlo was a child of the digital generation. Unlike previous saints, his mission field was the internet. He used his computer skills to build websites that cataloged Eucharistic miracles and Marian apparitions. His vision was clear: the internet should be a space for truth and beauty, not just distraction and sin. This is prophetic. In a world where technology often enslaves us, Carlo shows another path: technology as a servant of the gospel. He transformed his passion for computers into an instrument of evangelization. His life challenges us. How are we using our screens? Do we waste hours on vanity and anger? Or do we, like Carlo, allow technology to be a pulpit for Christ? 3. A saint who loved what we love. Carlo's relatability is one of the most striking aspects of his sanctity. He was not distant from the world we live in. He loved video games, football, and hang out with friends. He laughed, he played, he had fun. But here lies the radical difference. He refused to let these things enslave him. He set boundaries. He limited himself to only 1 hour of video games per week, so as not to be consumed by them. He enjoyed entertainment, but never let it dominate his soul. This balance is revolutionary. Carlo shows that holiness is not about rejecting joy, but about ordering it rightly. He teaches us that we don't need to escape the world to become holy. We need to transform how we live within it. 4. The hidden discipline behind holiness. Behind Carlo's cheerful personality was a strong discipline. He prayed the rosary daily, attended Mass as often as possible, and never forgot to spend time in adoration before the Eucharist. He lived with consistency, not just emotion. Holiness was not for him an occasional burst of devotion, but a daily habit. And this is perhaps the hardest lesson for us today. We crave inspiration, but avoid discipline. Carlo's life reminds us that sanctity is built on perseverance in prayer, faithfulness in little things, and consistency in love. 5. His impact after death. Carlo's death in 2006 could have marked the end of his influence. Instead, it was the beginning. His website on Eucharistic miracles continues to inspire millions. His story has spread globally, touching people across cultures and languages. He was beatified in 2020, and already countless young people look to him as a model of modern sanctity. What is even more shocking is the incorruption of his body, found in a state that defies natural decay. His resting place in Assisi has become a pilgrimage site, drawing thousands every year. Carlo's legacy shows that holiness does not die, it multiplies. 6. Why Carlo matters today. We live in an era of confusion, distraction, and superficiality. Many young people feel lost, trapped in virtual worlds, and disconnected from God. Carlo offers them hope. He shows that you don't have to be perfect, famous, or powerful to be holy. You can love God deeply while living a normal life, using a smartphone and walking the streets of a modern city. This is why he is often called the patron of the internet. His witness speaks directly to the struggles of this generation. Loneliness, addiction to screens, spiritual emptiness. Carlo answers them not with condemnation, but with example. He proves that sanctity is not outdated, it is the most radical and relevant thing we can live. 7. The shocking normality of a saint. Perhaps the greatest shock of all is that Carlo was like us. He was not a mystic in a monastery, nor a martyr in a coliseum. He was a teenager in sneakers with a backpack and a laptop. His ordinariness is precisely what makes him extraordinary. This is the disruptive message. Holiness is not for the few, it is for everyone. Carlo shattered the myth that sainthood is unattainable. He reminds us that the call to holiness is universal and possible even in the midst of Wi-Fi, sports, school, and ordinary struggles. 8. The call for us. Carlo's legacy is more than admiration, it is invitation. We cannot read his story without asking ourselves, what am I doing with my life? Am I wasting hours on meaningless pursuits, or am I living with purpose? Am I enslaved by technology, or do I use it for good? Do I treat each day as a gift to be offered, or do I drift in mediocrity? Carlo's example dismantles our excuses. If a 15-year-old boy could reach holiness in the middle of the digital age, why can't we? His life removes the distance between sanctity and ordinary life. It forces us to confront our own choices. The fifth sign of Carlo Acutis' holiness is the most accessible and the most revolutionary. He made holiness ordinary. He proved that sainthood is not about leaving the world, but about transforming it from within. His life teaches us that holiness is possible for every student, every worker, every digital native. Carlo's legacy is this: to show that even in the chaos of the 21st century, even with all its distractions and noise, a life of purity, joy, and holiness is not only possible, it is urgent. He lived what he preached. Everyone is born as an original, but many die as photocopies. Don't be a photocopy. And so his ordinary life became extraordinary. His short years became timeless, and his witness continues to echo as a challenge to each of us. Carlo Acutis stands as proof that holiness is not a relic of the past, but the destiny of the present and the hope of the future. The eternal echo of a teen saint. Carlo Acutis lived only 15 years, yet his life continues to echo across the world. He was ordinary, a teenager who loved soccer, computers, and friends. And yet, through his deep love for the Eucharist, his purity of heart, and his courage in suffering, he became extraordinary. Carlo proves that holiness is not distant nor reserved for saints of the past. It is possible here now, in the middle of ordinary life. What makes Carlo unforgettable is his fearless joy. He faced death not with despair, but with trust. I am happy to die because I lived without wasting even a minute on things that do not please God. His words confront us, challenge us, and invite us to look honestly at how we live. Carlo's story is more than inspiration. It is a call to stop wasting time, to embrace love, to let faith transform our daily lives. He reminds us that we are born originals, not meant to die as photocopies. His short life shines like a beacon, whispering to every generation, holiness is possible, even for you.